First, let me state for the record, I do not believe that there are atheists. Everyone believes in something. They may call it the universe, they may call it science, but everyone believes in something.
Hi, my name is Max Sabin. I'm a senior at Indiana University, and I am studying physics.
I'm Robert. I'm going in my senior year at Purdue University, studying sound for the performing arts. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and where you're from?
Sure. So my name is Pinchas Allouche. I'm the founding rabbi of Congregation Beth Tefillah in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I'm glad to be here with you guys.
Our first question is, in Jewish theology and philosophy and ethics, whether the concepts of good and bad, good and evil can be described objectively.
It's a great question. So it depends. If good and evil are described by human beings, then they have to be subjective because every brain is different. One of the worst calamities of history is the Holocaust. And that came from the most distorted definition of what good is by the Nazis. They deducted that it is good to kill Jews. But the reason for that is because it came from human brains that are always exposed to change. If good and evil are rooted in divine ethics or in the Torah itself, then they have to be objective and therefore unchangeable. If God tells us do not murder, then do not murder. There is no justification for murder. So it depends on who defines good and evil. If it is man, it is subjective. If it is God, it is objective.
So why do you believe in God? Is there something, that happened or you were taught from a young age? What got you to really believe in Judaism?
So, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, writes that anyone who knows the why can deal with almost any how. To me, God is the why of creation. I know that I was created by God with a mission, with a reason for that creation, with a why. And to me, that is the greatest benefit I receive from believing in God. It gives me a direction to life, and it gives me also tools to be able to deal with almost any how. And I think that anyone who believes in God is deeply connected to that why and perhaps even deeply committed to that why. Therefore, believers in God also lead more meaningful lives, as statistics show, and are nicer people, as the researchers show, than people who don't believe in God. I'll give you a quick example. A research done by an Iranian author who wrote a book called Big Gods. But there he speaks about how, for example, students, as you, cheat less in bright rooms than they cheat in dark rooms. Do you know why? Because in dark rooms, they are not being watched. So the inclination to cheat is greater. Bright rooms, they are being watched, which is really one of the great essentials of the belief in God. I am being watched. I am accountable. And then we cheat less. We become nicer. But that's just a glimpse into the benefits of believing in God and essentially giving us a why to live.
To people who really don't believe in God or who have doubts in Judaism and God, what would you say to them, and how would you get them to kind of reconnect with their Judaism?
Another great question. First, let me state for the record, I do not believe that there are atheists. Everyone believes in something. They may call it the universe, they may call it science, but everyone believes in something. You are right now believing in the builder of that chair because you sat on it without ensuring that it is stable enough for you to sit on it. So we believe in something, whether in detail or in the large picture. There are very, very few atheists that have made the pages of history, true atheists. So the expression that says that there is no atheist in the foxhole, because at one point in life we try and cling to something that is greater than us. We may not call it God, but it is certainly a type of belief in God. Or to quote the great Maggid of Mezrich, he was one of the founders of the Hasidic movement, who said to an atheist who came to him, so-called atheist who came to him and said, I do not believe in God. And he responded, well, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Now, that's just to state that idea for the record. But to go deeper into your question, I think that in order to inspire belief in God, we first have to inspire belief in oneself. Mm-hmm. because deep within oneself there is a peace of God. A peace of God that provides infinite potential. A peace of God that believes in the self more than sometimes we believe in the self. If we inspire belief in that peace of God, in that infinity within each and every one of us, then we'll eventually inspire the belief in God. But then more importantly, we'll then inspire also the belief in the God within that will create greatness.
So do you see a belief in God as an essential component to being Jewish, or is it possible to be, like some people consider themselves culturally Jewish but not necessarily fully religious? So what do you think that being, having a strong belief in God is an essential part of like being Jewish?
So to your point, the belief in God is not only an essential to being Jewish, I think it's an essential to being a human being altogether. The belief in God is a universal value. In fact, one of the 7 Noahide laws that are meant that are directed towards nations of the world is to believe in God. And yes, I do believe that that is an essential part of being. Why? Because God, as mentioned, is a part of who we are. If we neglect that part of who we are neglecting a part of ourselves. And it is not good for any human being to neglect any part of himself. Imagine Mozart being born without a piano and neglecting his musical part. How terrible would that have been for him and for the world altogether? God is a part of who we are. Neglecting God brings upon a tragedy to the human experience.
What would you say is the best way to go about getting a Jew to reconnect with God?
It's a great question. Well, it depends on the Jew. Everyone connects in different ways. You know, I'm reminded of that horrific biblical story in which we speak about the first murder of history, where Cain killed his brother Abel. And we are taught that he killed him by stabbing him in many different places. Why? As Rashi, the foremost commentary, explains, because this was the first murder of history, and he did not know where the soul comes out from, how the person expires. So he stabbed him in many different places. One of the great rabbis of Israel, the chief rabbi of Israel of some 20 years ago, Rabbi Avram Shapiro, would say that just as we do not know where the soul comes out from, we also do not know where the soul comes in from. So everyone connects with his soul, with God himself altogether in different ways. So I think the prerequisite is to first and foremost know the person, relate to the person that you are speaking to. My beloved rabbi, Dean Evan Yisrael Steinsaltz, told me that when I became a rabbi, my task was to relate to not just to the questions that people would ask me, but to the question behind the question, or to the person behind the question, as they put it today. We first have to understand who we are speaking to, and then relate to Judaism on their level of understanding, on their level of connection. That's number one. But number two, I think that to inspire people towards reconnecting or celebrating Judaism altogether, it is best done with deed. Because I wholeheartedly believe that we are not what we think. We are not what we feel. We are what we do. Our deed makes us who we are. People who give charity all the time become givers. People who, on the other hand, are as stingy as it gets, become stingy people. And that's true for every facet of life. We are what we do. If we want people to be fully in love with Judaism, then let them pick one deed. If they pick one deed and do it again and again, they will become that deed. And eventually, that Jewishness will be sparked and their soul will be ignited. So I think this is a particularly important idea for rabbis, because very often us rabbis try and make people feel good. I often say in my congregation that we are not here as a spa. We are here as a gym. We don't want you to feel good. By feeling good, no progress will be made. But when you go to a gym where they ask you to focus on deed, to stretch yourself and to do arduous things and exercises, that's when you grow. And therefore, I say that we are what we do, and the emphasis should be on deed. Because the more we stretch, the stronger we become. The more we stretch Jewishly, therefore the more Jewish we become.
So then would you say that the people who, struggle with Judaism, who maybe take a step back to try and reconnect, are hurting themselves because they're stepping away from their connection to God then?
Well, I would advise people like that not to step away, but to step in a different direction, so that there is a reconfiguration that is made without ever abandoning, God forbid, who you truly are, or that part of you that we spoke of. To give you a classic example, I have a congregant in my community who did not want to come anymore to the services every week. He had his kids playing soccer and all sorts of other distractions. So instead of coming on the Shabbat morning to the Shabbat morning service, he decided to come to the Tuesday morning service. So he stepped away from the Shabbat service, but he stepped into the Tuesday morning service. So I would encourage people who are in such a state not to, God forbid, step away, but to step in different directions.
How would you say that translate to, us being in college? We're super busy, with classwork, extracurriculars. And for me, myself, sometimes I'm super busy with work and I can't find the time to come on a Friday night. But, maybe the Chabad campus doesn't offer that extra step or that extra day to, like you said, pivot. So what would you say is a different way for college students to go at it?
So that's a great question. Look, God gave us 613 commandments. Mm-hmm. So if coming on Friday night is impossible for you at this standpoint, or you think it may be impossible, then pick a different commandment. That was the generosity of God by giving us 613 commandments so that we can connect to Him in many different ways. I will quote again my beloved Rabbi Adin Israel Steinsaltz of blessed memory. I was with him at this lecture in San Francisco where he was speaking about Judaism altogether. And at the very end of the lecture, a woman stands up and says, "Rabbi, how can I feel God? How can I come close to God?" And he responded very humorously, but also in a very truthful way. "You're asking two separate questions," he told this woman. "How can you feel God? Possibly a few milligrams of LSD will help you. But how can you come close to God? Well, there are 613 commandments. Pick one or two or three. Those are your bridges to coming close to coming close to God." And I think that this is true not just for college students, but for everyone who seeks that connection. Pick a deed. And if Shabbat dinner is not yet possible for you, then pick something else. But make sure, again, that you are stepping into a different direction, not stepping away altogether.
What would your response be to either a congregant of yours or someone who approaches you and says that they find it difficult to connect with the stories in the Torah or in the Talmud because of the time difference between them of these people who lived thousands of years ago, and the change in the world, and especially things like technology and how that changes the difference between our lives and theirs?
So again, it depends on the person, but I would usually take the route that focuses on winning the war, not the battle itself. I have a beloved friend by the name of Shmuley Green, whose father was a great professor at NASA. And he once wrote a very long letter to the late Lubavitcher Rebbe with many questions about the conflicts, what he saw as conflicts between science and religion. And the Rebbe ignored him at first. Only after 3 years, when this professor wrote to the Rebbe that he has now become much more connected to Judaism, then the Rebbe decided to respond to all of these questions. And then the Rebbe added a P.S. at the very end of the letter, saying, "You may be wondering why I waited so long to answer your questions. Well, that is because my job in life is to connect Jews to Judaism, not to win arguments." And I think that's an important advice for many of us who are sometimes confronted with all sorts of arguments. Let us remember that first and foremost, our job is to connect Jews to Judaism or people to themselves. And then we can win the argument when people are emotionally equipped to deal with the answers. So that's my answer to this question. But if I may add, I would say that I would dare everyone to dig further into the Torah, and not only the Torah, but the Talmud and the many other Jewish sources in order to find answers to those questions in which there appears to be a conflict between science and religion, or science and Judaism. Because if we were to dig deep you will find that many of your questions will evaporate. Many of the answers are there. Sometimes it's just because our research is not as thorough as it should be.
So as a rabbi, what customs do you find that people in your congregation or outside have difficulty relating to?
So, as mentioned before, it depends on the human being. For some people, it's very hard for them to start wearing a kippah, for example. They feel embarrassed at first, and they don't want to stick out. For others, it is not just a custom, but it is the mitzvah of keeping kosher. I'll tell you a cute story. I had a couple in my office not too long ago who said to me, look, Rabbi, we would love to start keeping kosher, but we love pepperoni pizza. So what we decided to do is to still order the pepperoni pizza, but to take off the pepperoni and just eat the pizza. So at least we're not eating pepperoni. And I said to them, that's great. That's a step forward in your Jewish journey. Everyone has their own journey, and everyone has their own types of hardships and difficulties. But if there was one custom that I think is most difficult for people, I would say it is the custom of connecting to community life as it is in a synagogue. I think people are very private, and for them to all of a sudden become one with a family that is a community, sometimes it takes a long journey. So I would suggest to these people that they try. And I often share with them the story of this father who was on his deathbed, and he called his children, and although he was very, very frail, he still asked them for a few sticks of wood to try and break. That at first gave this father one stick, and he was able to break it, although again he was very weak. And then he asked for all of the sticks together, and he put them in a bundle, and he tried to break the bundle, and he wasn't successful. Then he asked his children to try and break the bundle. They too weren't successful. And then he turned to them and he said, look, I wanted to leave you with one last life lesson. If you live alone by yourselves, you'll be easily breakable by the storms of life. But if you come together as one bundle, then nothing in the world will break you. And I think that when people understand the power of community, that it makes them unbreakable because we are all there for each other during tough times and more joyous times, then it is easier for them to adapt to a community and to eventually involve themselves and become active members of that community.
The concept is that everyone is guaranteed a place in Olam Haba, or the world to come, where our sins are all forgiven at this one point in time after we die. Then what is the point of Teshuvah while we're living?
It's a great question. I would quote Socrates, who famously said, an unexamined life is not worth living. To live with sins is to live an unexamined life. And that's certainly not a life that brings meaning, that brings joy, that brings purpose. So why live a life like that? I'm not sinning, or I'm not sinning because I care too much about my world to come. I'm not sinning because I want to live an examined life that is worth living. The world to come is the world to come. And when I get there, I'm sure I will be able to enjoy the fruits of my labor. But for now, the focus is on this world, on the now. There is a reason why the Torah does not speak much about the world to come and the afterlife, because what matters most is now.
Thanks for being here and answering our questions.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.